You ask a vendor to say, do you have micro learning? They'll say yes, because they do. They can put a small piece of content up there. But if you say, I wanted to do this and serve a daily question and I want it to be done on a mobile app and it has to be tracked and I want to be able to see dashboards from a managerial standpoint of how my team is consuming this micro learning, that's a big different set of requirements. So the best buyers take the time to define that out and write that into a request for proposal.
Se você deseja acessar um canal sobre casas inteligentes com apresentação de dispositivos que tornam seu dia a dia mais fácil, dicas de automação, explicações como tornar sua casa mais digital e ter acesso a tutoriais e muito mais, acesse Makers Vault no YouTube. É tudo junto. Makers Vault, o segredo dos fabricantes, o canal para aprender e se desenvolver. Hello everyone, welcome back to Descomplica T&D Simplify L&D, the most complete learning and development podcast in Brazil, and also in countries that have Portuguese as their mother language. My name is Michel Mussolin, and I would like to thank each and every single one of you that come back every week to listen, to reflect, and evolve as a professional and as a human being. Over the past years, we have been listening that companies need to work on skill development in their workforce. At ATD Congress in 2022, for example, the need to focus on upskilling and reskilling to improve the employees' results by the enterprises was very emphasized. And some days ago, during SHREAM 2023, the same thing happened. But the formal learning provided by the traditional LMSs seems to be not enough to cover all possibilities and needs. When working at a complex and diverse scenario, people need to have the ability to improve their skills and knowledge in a fast way, and micro-learning and tools for performance support are gaining space and focus. So, the question remains, is the LMS doomed to death? How to gain real advantage in the usage of LMS solutions in a world that demands agility, performance support, and informal learning? To answer these and other questions, today we have a special guest with us. He has a bachelor degree of arts and business economics from Bloomsburg University of Pennsylvania, and he is Master of Science in Instructional Technology by the same university. During his professional journey, he worked as Director of Interactive Technologies, Senior E-Learning Consultant, Senior Account Executive in one of the biggest LMS companies, Vice President of Sales and Marketing, as well as VP of Strategic Accounts, and from the past 10 years, he has been working as an independent research and consulting professional, helping companies of all sizes to choose and use modern LMS and learning technology solutions for their unique business needs. Currently, as CEO of Talented Learning, his blog, podcasts, webinars, reviews, case studies, and depth reports are helping decision makers to find the best solution over thousands of systems available today in the market. Today, our episode is also celebrating the Independence Day, July 4th, and I'm here with my shirt, an American shirt, as a tribute, and it is with a great honor that we present John Lee. Welcome, John, to our show. Thanks for being here with us.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Main question of our episode today, we see not only in the U.S. market, but also globally, a tendency to micro-learnings, performance support, and sometimes the LMS seems to be not so deeply used by the company. So Are we stuck on formal learning, or we are seeing a movement to add functions to cover the whole 70-20-10 model and include micro learnings as well in our usage by the professionals of our markets?
Good question, Michel. Good question. I think it's easy as a L&D professional to lose a perspective of what's happening in the LMS industry in general and in the global marketplace, because once an organization has a learning management system, it's very easy not to look around and see what the market is doing or what the competition is doing, because organizations don't switch learning management systems very easily unless something is dramatically wrong. And I say that because learning management systems over the last 10 years, since the evolution of the cloud, have really evolved. So I've been directly involved in learning management systems for almost 30 years now as a professional. And for many of those years, certainly for 20 of those years, LMSs were 100% in the formal learning space. So they worried about instructor-led training, scheduling classes and courses and sessions and instructors and equipment and rooms and making sure that's happening at a timely basis. And then it evolved into taking courses from an e-learning or online learning standpoint. And so, from a SCORM 1.2 or a XAPI perspective, but it's a course. But what's happened in the last 10 years is there's really been a revolution or an evolution from courses to resources, of LMSs really having to do both. And it's mandatory to do both. So LMSs still, especially for employee use, need to track employee compliance, who all the employees are, their jobs, their roles, their managers, their organizations, their locations, and make sure that they're consuming and completing the mandatory training that's in the organization. But as the 70-20-10 rule shows, much of an organization's knowledge is not contained within the formal courses, but through the informal interactions and social learning. So bit by bit by bit over the last 10 years, the learning system community has been moving in that direction, adding more social, interactive, gamification, learning, spaced repetition, smaller pieces of content, more micro learning into the equation to cover both learning styles, both that formal and that informal methodology. And with over 1,000 learning systems in the market, as you described, there's a lot of innovation and diversity and differentiation between those solutions on the level and importance they apply towards the more informal. But in a nutshell, without a doubt, the learning system industry and the LMS industry is, in my opinion, is not rooted in formal learning anymore. They're making the migration. And a final point to that is there's a lot of organizations that are stuck on their old school learning management systems. So the ones that are probably the worst at informal learning are the names that you know the best, because they've been around for the longest and they were founded and designed and envisioned, long before the time of mobile, cloud, and social media. And so those organizations tend to be lagging behind the industry. But the other 995 solutions out there, I think, have a much clearer perspective on the holistic approach that needs to be taken to learning in an organization.
Any change of requirement over the past? You already mentioned some, but I mean, based on the audience that are consuming courses, we saw generation, the millennials, now they are the biggest percentage of the workforce globally, and they learn in a more social way than we do, the X generation. For example, I can stay in a room and sitting down in a room and see the professor explaining, and I will take notes in my notebook, in my paper notebook, and then study. And this generation, they learn in a fastest way than we do. They don't take notes. They are more digital. So if you see the requirements on the industry for LMS's solutions, do you believe that they have changed the requirement to be more visual, to be more digital, the tracking of the courses, or we are using the LMSs in the same way that we have been used for the past 10 years?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's a combination of the both. The traditional way of using learning management systems to manage compliance, especially for employee training. We'll get into how that's only one sector of the market, employee training, but the employee training market in L&D still has that formal component that needs to be done, millennial or not. It's immaterial. It's the regulations handed down either at a federal or a country, a state or a province or a local, or even at the company level. That mandatory training. So that part hasn't changed. But the evolution of more social and informal pieces into the learning system and into the process is a mandatory component for most buyers. For example, many organizations want the concept of managing cohorts inside their learning management system. And managing cohorts, a cohort is a fancy name for a class or a group of students that move through a program together. And it could be a one-day program, or it could be a one-year program that has a lot of different components. And those programs can have self-study activities, self-reflect activities, working in groups, submitting assignments to the group and getting group feedback or cohort feedback, or getting instructor feedback on that, being able to schedule one-on-one sessions with your instructor as part of this, and working in the calendar parts to get on the calendar so that you can have that one-on-one session, digital ways to take notes, to annotate things, to highlight things, and color them as part of this. There's the concept of submitting videos or submitting pictures or even text, and having instructors or your peers or your cohorts offer feedback and criticism on that. But then also having things like AI be able to analyze a video and say, you're doing this right, and you're speaking too slow, or you're using too many ums, and to give you feedback on things that are more evolved to doing, not just retaining knowledge, facts of knowledge that you typically get in courses, but to introduce that doing concept to show that you not only understand the skills, but you can apply those skills, and the feedback and the grading and the rubrics that are associated with that. And virtual classrooms, in the time of the pandemic, you see a lot of the tools, allow you to break off into groups. So to take a group of 20 and split that into groups of three or four groups to work together on breakout sessions and things like that, all very social. All that ties into the learning management system can manage that whole process, that whole curriculum of content, those different formal, informal pieces. And there's a lot of the normal things that you would see from a formal or an informal standpoint inside of learning management systems, of social collaboration areas, discussion groups, threaded discussions, groups that are associated with a particular class or anybody that's taken any instance of the same class, private groups that are associated. So the facilitation of communication between holistically across all the employees and across different subsets, sales and service, or maybe this team or this R&D team. So all those are just off the top of my head examples of informal activities that are now common in most L&D organizations, a lot of L&D organizations, and certainly a lot of the available learning systems that are on the marketplace.
Are the employees consuming the LMS content through apps in their smartphones, or normally the LMS solutions that you have seen and researched, they focus only on the notebook or PC to make the course?
Mm-hmm. So this is something I study very closely. Since I founded Talented Learning 10 years ago, I'm now pushing almost 400 different solutions that I've reviewed formally. And so one of the things I'm always looking at with each new review of a solution, is the mobile capabilities, and it's something I keep my thumb on. And so the number one strategy for LMS companies is to make their LMS 100% mobile responsive. And what that means is that you can use the browser on your smartphone, on you can use a tablet, you can use a PC, you can use a laptop, you can go in between those different devices, over time, over the same hour, over the same week, and keep track of your location, but have the LMS and the content automatically adjust to whatever device that you're using and display properly. That's the standard, not just in LMSs, but that's the standard in technology. You see that whether you're on Facebook or Instagram or Amazon. It's the same concept of the screen modifying a portion of the learning management companies, and in my experience, it's around 25%. Additionally, release apps, specific apps, either white label apps on Apple or Android, or apps in general that aren't branded, that are just branded towards the organization. And these apps typically, if they just do the exact same thing that you could do from a mobile responsive, then they don't build the apps. So the apps typically do something incremental that make it more valuable. And some of those things would be, in-app notifications, the driving of micro learning on a daily basis. So driving questions or little pieces of content, right to your smartphone, and using the notification, using the capabilities of geolocation, for example, for registrations or automatic registrations or conference registrations when you're attending sessions in a conference or in a group setting like that, just checking you in and out. Our other mobile, the ability to download content to your mobile device and take it on a plane or a train. And then when the next time you have internet access, to sync those in progress or those completion results or training progress results back up to the learning system. And then also more things on gamification. So to be able to, one organization I see, you can challenge somebody else on their mobile app to a knowledge challenge where you both get 5 questions, and whoever answers them right wins points for their team. And so the integration of these games and contests and things also display themselves on mobile devices. So in summary, mobile responsive is the first punch, and mobile apps are the second with learning systems company. But the mobile apps are now getting cool. One organization that I see, they specialize in helping to train dealers and resellers and franchises, locations that represent your brand but aren't they're not your employees, that are owned by somebody else, franchise organizations. And so they're using apps to do for managers to review people doing, making a hamburger right, or, checking in a customer right at a hotel. And so, they're either reviewing it, or they got their mobile app where they have a rubric, and they're annotating the actual, once again, the doing of skills, the performing of those skills, to make sure that it's not just knowledge somewhere up in your head, but it's knowledge that can be applied in the field and proven. And so, we see a lot of that.
Great. And what about the cake filling? I mean, you have the platform, you have the way, we call here the bone structure of your learning facility, but you have the content, right? The course itself can be a video, can be a SCORM, can be an infographic, whatever. And have you had the opportunity to evaluate those as well during your research in terms of different solutions the companies are using to be more didactic to the different generations we have in the workforce, or they are using the same SCORM or PowerPoints transformed to a SCORM file just to check the box and track the mandatory courses that the employees need to do.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, there's been a lot of evolution in content For sure. So let's take it in a couple of pieces. Uh, Employee content. So if you have an LMS for your 1,000 employees, 80% of the content that you are delivering to your employees from a mandatory standpoint can be found off the shelf. So either aggregated from Open Sesame or Skillsoft or Go One or some other organization that has as their business model aggregated contents across all different types of conceivable topics that are applicable to um, different companies. That same sexual harassment course, is applicable in Brazil and United States, for example, or could be. So that type of content, that off the shelf content, still, in my opinion, resembles the traditional SCORM based content, the page turner, almost based on PowerPoint, with interactions and video and different pieces on it. And so that boring content is still out there. And you know, some people are, would be more enthused than other. I try not to take that type of content if I can get away with it. So that's the 80%. The 20% for employees, that's where all the fun comes in. And the 20% is typically around programs or services or products or things that are proprietary to your organization that you can't find that content off the shelf. And it matters because it's the content that helps train your sales and your customer service people to support your products and services. Perhaps it talks about the culture of your content, and that 20% is where organizations are really striving to do something different because that's the important stuff. That's the content that they're trying to change behavior and not check a box with. And so for that, there's a lot of different strategies. There's the traditional strategies of using Articulate or Camtasia or other third-party authoring tools. But the new evolution of learning systems are bringing intra LMS authoring tools. So the ability to create micro learning or full blown courses directly in the LMS and not use a third party tool. And that's one of the areas of rapid innovation in the industry is each organization trying to outdo themselves on how much easier and faster and effective it is to use their system to develop content directly within it. In fact, they're using artificial intelligence now to you can just take a video and artificial intelligence transcribes that video, reads it, assigns skills and competencies, writes the objectives, writes the test questions that are pertaining to that objective, and has the content, can put content or interspersed interactivity in there and games in there, and have a final test. That can all be done by AI right now, just starting off from a video or a PowerPoint, and make this course for you to get it to 80 or so percent. And in those capabilities, it's everything from the informal to the formal, depending on the solution that allows you to create that content. So it's really exciting. Um, uh, I don't get excited about the page turners. Nobody shows me the page turners, but people show me, the evolving content that they're doing. Once again, that's the theme of today for me, or the theme of 2023 is it's about the doing now. That they want the LMS to manage the doing aspects and not just what as they try to do it. But an important point that I alluded to earlier that I haven't come around to, that employee LMSs are the slowest growing segment of the learning management market. Most people don't realize that. But the fastest growing segments is a lot of those 1,000 learning systems. They use LMSs to train, organizations use LMSs and e-learning content to train their customers, or to train, and I talked about resellers and franchises, but people that are in your value chain, but they're not actually your employees. And that content isn't the 80-20 rule. There's no off-the-shelf options there. When you're training your customers, 100% of the content that you're creating is custom, because it's about how to use your products, your services, your software solution. That's what you're teaching your customers to use, your medical devices, your x-ray machines. You have to teach people how to do that. And that content is 100% custom. Create that content and make it special, and make voluntary learners that you can't say, take this content or you're fired. They have to want to take that content. They have to be enticed to take that content. Sometimes they have to open up their wallet and swipe their credit card to consume that content. That content has to be great. And that, that's where I live my life, is on that side of the equation of customer and partner education, because that's the fastest growing segment in the marketplace. Because if you train your customers and your customers, renew at a higher rate or have a higher customer satisfaction rate or reach time to value with your software faster, that's all measurable. You can see the effect of taking training and consuming training and not taking training, and that leads to a measurable business impact. And so organizations all over the U.S., but all over the world in general, are not just using their LMS for their employees; they're extending that out to their extended enterprise. And that's where a ton of rapid growth is. One, because of that proprietary content, but two, just think of it in terms of scale. An organization that has 1,000 employees is, a maker of financial software. They might have 1,000 or 800 employees, but it's not inconceivable they have, thousands and thousands of banks that have thousands and tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of employees that need to take that content to learn how to use that software. And so a small company that has 1,000 employees might be training 100,000 or 1 million or 10 million of their customers. And so the scale of that side of the learning market space is so much bigger than the employee scale. And the employee market is much more mature because LMSs for employees have been around for 30 years. But for the other segments, those external learners, that's a relatively new segment of the last 10 years. And organizations are now realizing that that's a competitive differentiation. And if financial software company A trains their customers and financial software company B doesn't, company A is going to do better in the marketplace. And since that realization has hit learning and development, there's been a flurry of activity of deploying the solutions or expanding solutions to those external audience, where content is king. And content is king because if the content isn't stellar, isn't interactive, doesn't have formal and informal components, voluntary users won't take it, and organizations won't see that benefit of training their external audiences.
You see the ability of the LMS providers to offer and track the content for a third party, because normally what we see here in Brazil for the international solutions is that they only have the ability to control, track, and offer courses for employees only, not for a third party like suppliers or customers. Have you seen that now they are able to do that in US?
Well, yeah, well, for sure, it's the fastest growing part. So, very commonly, an organization. Well, let me back up. There's two types of learning systems out there, learning management systems in the broadest sense. One type is what I call the all-purpose, and what they're good at is they can deploy for Coca-Cola, for example, a big company, and they can have one area for their employees, another area for their suppliers and distributors, and another area for their customers. It's all the same LMS, but they're all completely different. You can't see one from the other, one group from the other. They have different delegated administrators. They have different single sign-on connections. Employees might use a different way to authenticate than customers. And so you can manage that separately. You can have a central library of content that some of it is applicable to all three groups or maybe just this group. So the ability for these all-purpose learning management systems to manage 2, 3, or 10 different diverse audiences, employee versus non-employee audiences, is core capability. LMS organizations strive to be able to support that diverse use case scenario to provide more value to buying organizations. So they only have to buy one system. For every all-purpose learning management system out there, there's a specialty learning management system where that learning management system just picks one of those groups, and that's all they focus on. And their assumption is that a big organization will buy a dedicated LMS for their customers or a dedicated LMS for their suppliers or franchises, and just keep that separate from the core employee LMS. And so I found that it's almost a 50-50 split in organizations that I run into that want to have one LMS that services all their audiences, or those that just say, a lot of times because it's under different political hierarchies, different budget cycles, that your customer service group or your sales group or your channel partner group, they just go out and buy their own solution and deploy that for their external audiences. So I don't think there's necessarily a right or a wrong way for organizations to do it, whether it's holistically, all one system, or whether they do dedicated systems. I think the important thing is that they're doing it in a measurable way. I see organizations having success with both processes. But from a technical standpoint, there is no technical limitations anymore. An organization needs to be able to support both internal and external audiences concurrently.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Great insights for us. And so to help our L&D and HR folks here in Brazil and also other countries that listen to us, in a nutshell, what would be the macro steps? I know that there's a lot of things that you need to consider, but if you could highlight for us some macro steps to take for selecting a best solution to the company that we work, what would be those steps?
Good question. So all the way back in 1996, I got out of my instructional design master's degree course, and I tripped into this job at a company called Wilson Learning out of Minneapolis in the United States. And what Wilson Learning did is they had an instructor-led curriculum. They were a training company that trained the world's largest companies on how to sell better, on to take like an AT&T sales force and train thousands of them on to improve their skill set on how to sell. And so Wilson Learning had this whole training curriculum. And so as an e-learning guy, I came onto there, and they wanted me to start with a team to start converting some of this curriculum into e-learning. But before they let me touch it, they put me through a year-long course. And so I spent a whole year learning how to sell. And as an introvert instructional designer, it was outside of my comfort zone. But I learned the process of solution selling and all the steps that are involved in that, and all the way that top professionals became professionals. So I'm answering your question. Don't worry. So I went and spent 14 years selling for two major learning management system providers, selling enterprise software solutions. And with that Wilson Learning experience, I became a student of the buying process, of watching buyers come in and buy, and realizing immediately that there was a difference between good buyers and bad buyers buying learning systems. And so I had it from the selling side, and so I'm studying it from the buying side of just watching how these buyers acted. And over that time, I developed what I thought is the best practice of steps that the best buyers were doing. And how do you know a best buyer? They were prepared. They knew what they wanted. They weren't waffling. They, had a process that they followed. They ran it like a project, and they got a solution that was aligned to their business goals. So what I did at the end of my career is I created this 9-step, and you don't have to take all of them, but a 9-step buying process that I see organizations go through. And that's what I installed here at Talented Learning. And so as my day job, I do lots of the blogging and the podcasting and the webinars that you mentioned. But 80% of my time is helping buyers, the next buyer, find the right system. And so I take them through a process, and they can do that themselves. You go to talentedlearning.com. I have all these resources for free that you can see these 9 steps and get resources in each one of them. But the most important things an organizations have to do, because there's 1,000 solutions out there, you can probably find a lot of solutions that can manage content and can manage your learners, but they're not going to take you to the next level. The best buying organizations start with, what's my business case? They start looking for their replacement learning management system or their new learning management system well in advance of when they anticipate buying. So very commonly, you buy a learning management system, you have a 2 or 3 year contract or a 5-year contract with a customer. It's a best practice at 12 to 18 months before the end of that contract to start researching the marketplace. Go on to Talented Learning and look at the case studies directory that we have there for free. that you can see what your competitors are doing, what things are happening in the solution, what has happened in learning management since the last time that you may have looked around the marketplace. And so to spend some time researching and just looking at the free veil, listening to podcasts, reading case studies, understanding what's new and what's happening in the marketplace. Then the next most important step is to define your business case and your requirements. And this is the step that is hard, is difficult, and that organizations want to skip. They don't want to take the formal time to define your requirements, but you have to. It's mandatory, in my opinion, because you have to say what you're looking for and why. And if you can't articulate that to yourselves, you can't articulate it to vendors. And if you can't articulate it to LMS vendors, then you're in a position just to get sold to versus, buying the solution that's best for your organization. And so when you define your requirements, it's a lot more than saying, I want micro learning or I want gamification. It's about starting off at the top and say, here are our audiences. Here are the behaviors that we want to change. Here are the use cases of how we're going to use a learning management system for our employees or for our suppliers or both. And then here are the use cases that we're going to see. Here's how franchise employees would use the system and to take content. Is it formally? Is it just onboarding? Is it performance support, on the job training? And then what are the features that are going to be required to enable that? And so it's not enough to say micro learning. What you have to do is you have to say this audience group is going to be using this, and after the training, we want to feed them, daily learning nuggets to close gaps or to do things. And so it's more than just we want micro learning. It's the steps of the micro learning and how we want to apply it. So organizations have to take that mandatory step to define those requirements, those use case scenarios, and then that translates down to what the requirements are. And those are the requirements then that can be written into a request for proposal that you can have vendors formally respond to. Because if you ask a vendor to say, do you have micro learning? They'll say yes, because they do. They can put a small piece of content up there. But if you say, I wanted to do this and serve a daily question and I want it to be done on a mobile app and it has to be tracked and I want to be able to see dashboards from a managerial standpoint of how my team is consuming this micro learning, that's a big different set of requirements. So the best buyers take the time to define that out and write that into a request for proposal, and then evaluate less vendors, because you can't evaluate all 1,000 of them. It's impossible. I've been trying for 10 years. I've only gotten to almost 400 of them. It's impossible to do it. So you have to, if you define your requirements and write those up into a request for proposal, and then use the publicly available tools at Talented Learning or Capterra or otherwise to take that list of 1,000 and get it down to a smaller list, then you can spend more time evaluating closely organizations that are qualified to meet your requirements versus trying to see, oh, this what this LMS does, or what's this guy do, and how is that different? You waste all your time and you run out of time. So start early, define your requirements formally, write them into a request for proposal, shortlist less versus more vendors, and evaluate them more deeply, and give yourself enough runway so you're not trying to do this all in 3 months. This is a year-long project to do it right. And then why do you want to take all those steps and go through all that work? Because once you buy a learning management system, you're stuck with it for the next 3 to 5 to 7 years. And to convince management to give you more money, or to tell management that you made a mistake, you should have chosen this system versus this system, is a very disagreeable thing to do politically and personally, and professionally for your career. And so if you make a mistake, you're stuck with it. If you don't have the right functionality because you didn't take your time to define those requirements and those use cases, guess what? Then you have to bridge that gap with manual administration, and you have to use spreadsheets, or you have to have, your administrator do this and this and this and this, every week, all those manual things. The lack of not defining your requirements always translates into more manual administration or not being able to achieve your goals. So the best buyers spend that time up front. It's just like building a house. You wouldn't go rush and build a house without going to an architect first and designing it all out and planning on exactly how you want to do. You wouldn't build an e-learning course without starting with the instructional design, without starting with the measurable change and the behaviors that you're going to try to change and the skills and the objectives of what you want to do. You don't buy a learning management system without figuring out exactly how you're going to use it for what audiences and defining your requirements and going through a formal buying process. Because if you don't in any of those scenarios, you're going to end up with something that you don't want and that doesn't work to the effect that you're hoping for.
First, you mentioned a lot buyer. You haven't mentioned the area or the department that will use or manage the solution. So in US, normally the process of sourcing a LMS or any EdTech or HR solution is focused on the buyer to create the request for proposal and not the demanding area, or the demanding area or department supports the creation of the RFP?
So bigger organizations, big organizations have their own procurement departments. And those procurement departments buy all types of software for an organization. That's actually one of the most challenging scenarios is when the buyer is a contracting department and not L&D or not the group that's going to be using it. Because when they're defining it, they're asking all kinds of dumb questions, in my opinion, because they're trying to ask questions that are good for CRMs and websites and financial software and LMSs. And so they ask a lot of non-relevant questions in those RFPs. And they're generally, I think, the worst written RFPs that I see in the marketplace because they're too generic and they're trying to just use templates to do that. I find the more common approach, and this is probably an 80 or 90% of what I see, is the buyer is the ultimate user. So it's the buyer and the ultimate user. The ultimate user has to be the one that weighs in on the requirements, on the use cases, how they're going to use it, how they're going to deploy it. And typically, they're the ones that do or should be writing the request for proposal and documenting those requirements. In some cases, it's going to be that if you're working with AT&T or Coca-Cola, they have that procurement department and they're going to write those RFPs. But still, even in those scenarios, L&D has to be an active participant in that. Otherwise, they're going to end up buying a system that is inadequate or not designed to do what they're doing. It's really important to be in the process as an L&D professional.
So tell us about a little bit about the learning system market report that you have just released in 2023. It's an extensive study that you have conducted for the past months. And last year, probably you had some predictions for 2023. And after making this research, what were the predictions you did that had confirmed and what did not?
Big question. Big question. So I do all this research and I put it out freely on talentedlearning.com in the form of blogs and podcasts to do the same thing you're doing, Michelle, is to help educate the marketplace, help people, make better decisions professionally with learning technology. But then I wanted last year and going forward, I wanted to create another level that was just at a deeper level. So you wouldn't have to go to different blogs and you wouldn't have to search all over my site, but you could just go to one place. And so what I did in 2022 and what I do every year is I have my annual awards process where I give vendors the opportunity to submit an entry for our awards process. And to submit an entry, it's kind of obnoxious. I have a super huge and complex capability survey that takes a couple hours to fill out. I don't make any friends when they see how nobody talks to me for weeks after that, after they fill out that survey. So I make them fill out that survey and then spend an hour with me. And so last year I had about 150 organizations fill out that survey. I had about 100 of them spend an hour with me. So I spent literally 100 hours looking at 100 different solutions across the summer and fall of last year. And out of those 100, I chose 40 as what I consider the top 40 solutions in the world. And so those 40 were split in between 20, which were all purpose, as I mentioned earlier, and 20 that were specialty. And what I did in the report, the 2023 report, is I created a report where I looked at the capabilities of those 40 vendors and compared and contrasted them across the commercial use cases. And so the report is about 200 some pages. But what it does is one section is it focuses on what are the 5 commercial use cases. So we've been talking about some of them today: employees, customers, channel and partner, but there's also content as a business and what's called extended enterprise, which is really doing multiple at the same time. For each one of those use cases, I highlighted what the business case was, what were the main uses of a system like that, what were the key features and functions and integrations that are required for that, who are the best vendors that scored well on those areas, so that no matter what your use case is, you'd be able to hone down on, make sure that you're not missing the most important things you shouldn't be missing in terms of business case and functionality, but then also help take that 1,000 down to 10 that specialize in exactly that. So one big section is just to go through those use cases, and as a big piece of education. The second piece is more the latter part of your question, is the predictive part. I wanted to see how these vendors stacked up, and what it turns out was almost 50 different points of comparison. And so I looked at things from a functional level, like micro learning, adaptive learning, AI, compliance, virtual, instructor led training, standard support, content standards, content authoring. And I basically compared and contrast the top 40 in all those functional categories, and determined a scoring system on who did the best and was the best in each one of those areas. I did the same thing for technical areas. So what was your API approach, your service level agreement, your hosting centers, your capabilities in terms of accessibility and mobile, your integration capability. What integrations do you have out of the box versus custom API integrations? I did the same thing with professional services. Some of those LMS companies have an assumption that it's all self-service. You get a free trial, you set yourself up. Other ones on the other end of the spectrum have full consulting teams, kind of like Accenture consulting teams, that help you business plan and implement and deploy these solutions. So I identify what the professional services capabilities were, as well as how they license their product. How they charge, not necessarily what they charge, but how they charge, how they license, because some license models align to use some use cases better than others. For example, if you're employees, you just need a named user license. You have 1,000 employees, you need 1,000 licenses. But if for customer learning, you don't want named users, because you might have 1,000,000 customers, but only 100,000 are going to use the system in 1 year. So you want to pay based on usage, not based on who's in the database. And so I tracked the different ways of how you could buy that. So the report then just compares and contrasts across those 50 different areas, across professional services, technical, license, business, so that you could really hone down and see what's important and who's the best in all these different areas. And then the final section of the report is for those 40 vendors. I provided a 2-page snapshot that's just loaded with information about their capabilities, so that organizations, buying organizations, can try to get down to that short list of 4 or 5 solutions that meet their goals and meet their requirements, and they can get really picky on picking the best of those 5, versus trying to evaluate 25 at the same time and find a learning system. So the report is really to help buyers navigate the market and to narrow down to what I think are the best. As far as my predictions, we've been talking about a lot of them today, of seeing what was important and what's not important with these learning system providers. What's important? Skills and competencies, micro learning, AI, adaptive learning, personalization, user experience, content authoring. Those are all things that were critical buying features. I asked the vendors in that survey, which of these are critical or not to your buyers? And there was like 100 different choices. And the ones I just mentioned are the ones that just rose to the top of the list, whether you were an all-purpose or you were a specialty provider. But I think the core conclusion that I have out of there is that the diversity and the innovation in these systems is amazing, and it's not all happening in the same area of the products. The innovation is happening differently with all different vendors, and what's resulting is almost like a starburst of supernova of innovation going in every conceivable direction from use cases to integrations to functionality to capabilities. And it's just amazing and fascinating to see from my perspective of how fast our industry is moving and how far away from where we started this conversation, and that LMSs are these monolithic, old, boring systems. It just isn't true. It just isn't true. Sure, there's boring systems out there, and probably a lot of listeners might be stuck on, one of those old systems that were around from 20 years ago. But all the new systems, all the ones born in the last 10 years, the innovation is just absolutely outstanding. And if you go to Talented Learning, I have what's called the Learning Systems Directory. It's on the main menu, and it's where I have those same top 40 and other learning systems. Then I have in the profiles, the online profiles, I also have demonstration videos that I've done with each of these vendors, and briefings that you can hear about their business and their differentiators and the things that make them special as an organization, and see demonstrations. And I have my own podcast where I have the vendors participate, and so that I can ask them questions just like this about their areas of innovation. So there's just a ton of free resources on our site that you can use to educate yourself across these different areas.
Conclude this topic, this last topic, John. If when you compare and contrast the 40 final suppliers, do you recall what would be the function that all of them have, and one function that not all of them have, and it's a point of discussion, something that is not standard in all of them?
That's a good question. I think without a doubt, all LMSs can manage learners, can manage content, and the interrelationship between the two. At its core, every single LMS, all 1,000 of them, perform that function, and all 1,000 of them have a reporting engine on the back, so that you can see that training progress and evaluate that in different ways, either by the individual, the group, or the organization. So I think everybody has that. That's if you have those three things: managing content, managing learners, and being able to get reports, you have yourself an LMS, you have yourself an LMS company. All the other things I mentioned are not standard in every LMS. So the ability to author content directly within the LMS, less than 50% have that. The ability to manage skills and competencies, less than 50%. The ones that have mobile apps, I think that was around 25% in there. The ones that have integrations to CRM systems or virtual classrooms or accounting systems or HR systems that are out of the box is all over the board. Some vendors like Docebo or Desire to Learn D2L, they have hundreds and hundreds of out of the box connectors to every conceivable learning system that's out there, or other ecosystems from CRMs, HR, single sign-ons, virtual classroom tools that you can just tie into your LMS. Other LMSs have none or five integrations, and they do it all in a custom basis. And so that's why there's 1,000 learning systems out there, because of the diversity of their ideal customer profiles, the target markets that they're trying to sell, and the use cases that they're specializing in, from employee to customer or channel and partner or content as a business, the industries that they're in. So healthcare versus financial versus manufacturing have different vendor players that specialize in there, as well as the regional areas. So, the organizations that can effectively sell and service and maintain solutions in Brazil is certainly a subset of what's out there in the 1,000. And so for all the other areas outside of managing users, content, and reporting, it varies from vendor to vendor to vendor. And that's the surprising thing. And even if you can manage virtual training, or just like my example earlier about managing micro learning, maybe you can just serve up a piece of small content, or maybe you can integrate that into the daily flow of work. Those are two different sets of capabilities that still are all in that group of of micro learning, and every group of functionality is like that. And so I know I'm way too deep into this because I spend my life into it, but the diversity of these systems is just outstanding. And when I guess the last little anecdote is people ask me all the time, aren't LMSs all the same? And I just chuckle at that question because it's so not. But when I sat through those 100 hours last summer and fall, there wasn't one of those meetings where I didn't see something that I hadn't seen before. So for every one of those, I'd be like, wow, that's really cool. Or I've never seen anybody do it that way. Or how you're managing organizations like that. Or wow, that's a really neat, cool step. And how about that mobile app? Or I've never seen that capability or that application of AI. Everybody, every single organization had something new, and they were all different. It's all in different categories. And so that's the fascinating thing about our industry. I think over time it's going to consolidate. We're not going to have 1,000 vendors 10 years from now. I think that pendulum is swinging backwards as organizations, start to consolidate and assemble these different solutions into bigger and better solutions that do more and more. And so it's an exciting time to be a learning technology professional or a learning and development professional that utilizes technology for sure.
It was an amazing episode here. We normally conclude our episodes making 3 final questions that you can answer with a short story, a phrase, a memory that you have. And I would like to conclude our conversation, make those final questions that if it's okay for you. Okay?
Sure. You have me nervous.
No, they are very easy to share. Well, first one, what's the most positive moment you had in your career?
My most positive moment in my career is starting talented learning. Um, after working for somebody else for 20 years and having bosses and all those things, I just thought that's how work was. And when I started talented learning, and for the first time in my life, I got to spread my wings and do lots of different things and wear lots of different hats and just go through the drinking from a fire hose process of starting a company and trying to get revenue in and building your websites and finding out how you're going to sell. And that whole process for me has been so rewarding. It's 10 years in now. I just jump out of bed every morning to get back in and keep pushing it forward. And so for me, I think just the experience of starting my own company has been so worthwhile and self-fulfilling that I truly wish it on anybody that wants to take that step if they're thinking about it to go ahead and do it. I've never had a single ounce of regret.
Sir. And now the opposite. What is your uh, learning moment? What is I don't like the word failing moment. I prefer learning moment. What would be your learning moment that you can share with us during your career?
That's a tougher one because I've had so many failures. It's hard to prioritize which one is the worst. I think for me, probably the biggest learning moment I had is how hard it is to choose a company to work for. And so, especially software companies and being an enterprise salesperson like I was, it's almost like selecting an LMS. You just can't be fast with your next opportunity. And I think I made a couple of poor choices where I selected the right position and the right salary, but not the right company. And and I think in those instances, if I would have slowed down and been more logical and done more research, I may have made smarter decisions about who I ultimately chose to be employed by. And it kind of like an LMS, when you make a wrong decision with your employment, it's not easy to rip off the band-aid. You're generally stuck there because you don't want to appear like you're a jumper from job to jobs. And so I think my biggest failures have stem from rushing too fast and not just taking my time to study and reflect in an analytical way. I don't know if that's the biggest failure I had, but a substantial one.
And how do you define your purpose in life and as a professional today?
I want to do some good. So my purpose is to be a force of good in the world. At Talented Learning, I feel like I'm doing good every day. I'm helping organizations buy technology and deploy technology that's helping people learn and become better and more educated and more effective and more valuable in the world in general. And so, my purpose is try to facilitate. That's why I have so much free stuff on my site. I make a charge for the majority of that, and make it a very closed group. But I want to try to help folks and try to help folks through doing the work for them and enabling them with good data. So from a professional standpoint, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to do some good in the world here and get buyers and sellers together in relationships that matter and last and do good and move the industry forward. And from a personal standpoint, it's the same thing in my personal life. I'm trying to just be a force of positivity and goodness in the world, and trying to be kind and helpful and open in all scenarios. So that's probably a corny answer, but I figured that on my deathbed, I wanted to look back and say, these are all the things I did that were a positive contribution to both my family and professionally and the world in general. And if that day comes and I have a sense of satisfaction, then I'll know I did a good job. But that's what I'm striving for.
And we have, I can say that we have a common purpose because, as you mentioned, putting your gifts and vocation to help others, and all the rest are consequence of the work that you do. It's great. Make a difference, a positive difference in the world should be the way we thrive our lives in this world. So I can say that we have a common purpose with this point of view. Okay,
and we're going to have anything in common. That's a good thing to have in common.
Yeah. I would like to thank you very much for your time to share with us all your knowledge, the insights. I believe that for all of our audience here in Brazil and also other countries that will listen, it was an amazing episode with a lot of information. Of course, we could be talking here for 2, 3, 4 hours. There are a lot of content to share, but I would like to thank you very much, and I hope that we keep in touch. And in 2024, I would like to take our solution here being evaluated by you, and be sure that we will be continue to be friends. Okay.
All right, great. Well, we've got that. We won't be friends after you take my survey this year.
No, I will.
As I talked about, but that's coming up here in a few weeks. So I'll make sure that that you're on the list for there. And I look forward to looking at your solution in much more depth than I have before. Also, if that report interests any listeners here on there, if that's available on talentedlearning.com. If you go to the checkout page and put in the coupon code Simplify for this podcast, you'll get a 50% discount on that. So I don't want to sit here and pitch, but if you are interested in that, listeners of this show, you can save half the price of the cost of that report. So, but otherwise, the resources on talentedlearning.com are free and voluminous. I encourage you to go check it out.
The talentedlearning.com site, I strongly recommend all of you. In Portuguese, guys, talentedlearning.com is the website that I strongly recommend you to learn, reflect, and evolve like we do here weekly in our podcast. Thank you, John, very much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, listeners, for tuning in. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, guys, thank you very much for listening to us in our special episode of Simplify L&D, Descomplica T&D, the podcast that collaborates to your evolvement as a professional as well as human being. Wishing to see all of you in our next episode. Keep safe. God bless you. Digital regards.